The holidays were always supposed to be a time of joy, fun, and a lot of energy. But I had long learned not to expect peace when it came to my in-laws. My husband Kyle and I had been married for 4 years, and our relationship, though strong, had always been tested by the dynamics of his family. I'm not talking about the typical in-law struggles. I mean that his family had a very specific way of doing things. They were big on traditions, big on expectations, and frankly, big on guilt trips if you didn't fall in line. To top it off, we had our 6-month-old daughter Lily to think about. The past year had been exhausting, trying to balance work, parenthood, and keeping up with the constant drama in Kyle's family. I loved him and I adored Lily, but there were days when I honestly felt like I was the only adult in the room. Kyle's mother, Karen, always had her way of doing things, and when she insisted on a traditional holiday gathering, it was rarely a question of whether we could join. It was more about how we would conform to her ideas of the perfect family holiday. This year was no different. Kyle and I had talked about it for weeks, going back and forth about whether we should just skip the family gathering altogether and have a quiet Christmas at home. After all, we didn't need the stress. But in the end, Kyle thought it was best for the family to keep the peace and honor tradition, so I reluctantly agreed. I wanted to give the benefit of the doubt. After all, holidays were supposed to be fun, right? I could already feel the tension building as the date for the family holiday drew closer. There had been gossip that Kyle's older sister Jessica and his primary rival for the title of favorite child had gone through a tough divorce. I had always gotten along with her, at least on the surface, but I knew that her situation would add a layer of stress to an already complicated family dynamic. She wasn't exactly the picture of emotional stability at the best of times, and now with her divorce, things were about to get even more dramatic. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't one to stir the pot. If Karen wanted to make things about Jessica, that was her business. The invitation for the holiday was sent early, just like always, and it came with the usual set of instructions. Karen had her rules. The house would be open from noon to midnight. No one could show up early or late, and there would be no exceptions. And of course, there was a list of food contributions to sign up for, making sure to note the correct portion sizes so that no one was left out. It was as though she had an unspoken list of who mattered more based on how much you sacrificed for the family. Kyle and I had been told to bring the turkey, and I could feel the weight of that responsibility. If the turkey wasn't perfect, Karen would surely let me know about it. Still, we forged ahead. We didn't have much of a choice. As the date drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I talked to Kyle about it, but he just brushed it off, insisting that it would all be fine. I wasn't convinced, but I also didn't want to ruin his holiday spirit. He really did try to make peace between me and his family. And I knew how important the holidays were to him. A month before the holiday, the real trouble began. I was going over the schedule for the event when I received a message from Karen. At first, it seemed like a harmless enough text. "Hi, sweetie. I just wanted to remind you about the holiday plans. We're all so excited to have you and Lily here. Just a heads up, though, there might be a bit of a change to the seating arrangements. I'll explain soon." I wasn't sure what that meant, but I figured it was just her trying to manage the ever-growing family. But when I heard back from her later that night, I couldn't have been prepared for what she said next. "Actually, after some thought, I think it would be best if you and Lily could leave after dinner. I know this may sound strange, but I really want Jessica to feel like she has some space to decompress from her divorce. She's been through so much lately, and I really think it's important for her mental health." I was shocked, to say the least. I stared at the screen, rereading her words and trying to make sense of it. Leave after dinner? Because Jessica needed space? It felt like a punch to the gut. But I tried to stay calm and think it through. Surely this was some kind of misunderstanding, right? I texted back, trying to stay diplomatic, but the anger was starting to bubble up inside me. "Karen, I'm not sure what you mean. It's a family holiday. Are you asking me to leave after dinner so that Jessica can have more space?" Her reply came quickly, as if she'd been waiting to justify her request. "Yes, exactly. I know it might feel uncomfortable, but I really think it would be for the best. She needs time to regroup, and it's just so important that we're all here for her." I wanted to scream. I had just had a baby 6 months ago. I needed support too. I didn't need to be kicked out of a family holiday so that my sister-in-law could decompress from her divorce. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Karen had probably been planning this for a while. Jessica's divorce had been weighing on her mind, and it was clear that Karen was going to prioritize her daughter no matter what. It was clear that this was going to be a problem. Question was, how was I going to handle it? Update 1. The tension in the air was thick as I stared at my phone, reading Karen's message over and over again. The words stung more each time, especially when I realized how casually she had dismissed both me and my daughter. This wasn't just about a request. This was about a blatant disregard for our place in the family. After everything I had done for them, after birthing their grandchild, Karen expected me to simply pack up and leave. Also, Jessica could feel comfortable. It's not like I was going to eat her or something. I didn't say anything right away. I knew this needed to be addressed head on, but I didn't want to cause a scene before I had a chance to process what had happened. As much as I tried to keep calm, I couldn't ignore the knot that twisted in my gut. I had been a part of this family for years, and in one moment, it felt like everything I had given them was worth nothing. Kyle had just come back from work. When he came into the room after his shower, I decided to break the news to him. His usual easygoing demeanor was absent as he saw the look on my face. I handed him my phone, showing him the text from Karen. His brows furrowed as he read it, his expression darkening. He passed the phone back to me without saying a word at first. Kyle stared at me for a long moment as if processing what was happening. His face twisted into one of disbelief. He couldn't understand how his mother had the nerve to ask us to leave for someone else's comfort. He said this was ridiculous, that after everything, he couldn't believe it. We were family, and yet Karen was telling us to pack up just to cater to Jessica's emotions. I nodded in agreement. It was becoming clearer by the second how selfish and inconsiderate they were being. Kyle didn't hesitate. His anger surged and his body tensed. He grabbed his phone and marched towards the living room. Our baby was still asleep. He dialed his mother's number and put the phone on speaker, and I could hear the familiar ring from across the room. "Mom," Kyle said when she answered, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "We're not coming to dinner. We won't be staying over either." I held my breath as I could imagine Karen's confusion on the other end. She didn't understand what was happening. How dare we defy her plans? Kyle didn't let her get a word in. He told her not to even try to talk him out of it. He made it clear that after her request for us to leave so Jessica could have space, he had had enough. He told her that we wouldn't tolerate it anymore. He was done letting her dictate to us like this. He told her he wasn't interested in hearing any more excuses or justifications. It was clear she had no regard for our family's well-being. Then he lowered his voice and continued, his words sharp. He reminded her of everything I had done for his family and how she was treating me. He said that I was the mother of his child and no one would ever come before that. I wasn't going to be sidelined just to make Jessica feel better. I had done enough, and this behavior was unacceptable. I could hear Karen's voice rising on the other end, but Kyle didn't let her speak. He told her in no uncertain terms that Jessica's drama would not take priority over his wife and child. He made sure she understood that we were his family now, and they had no right to try to force us out. I could imagine Karen's shock. Kyle was finally standing up for me, for us. There was no backing down. He wasn't done, though. He pressed further, his voice hard. He told her that she had no idea how much this had hurt both of us. He called out the hypocrisy in her behavior, saying that Jessica's emotional baggage had always taken precedence over anything, but no more. It was time for her to face the consequences of treating us like we didn't matter. The line was silent for a moment, and I could tell Karen was trying to process everything that Kyle had just laid on her. She was stunned, speechless, likely scrambling to find some defense. But Kyle wasn't finished yet. He cut through the silence, his words final and unyielding. He told her they weren't going to be a part of her holiday plans unless she was ready to apologize for the way she had treated us. He added that this wasn't just about dinner, it was about respect, something that had been missing from her side of the family for far too long. After a tense moment, Kyle hung up without waiting for a response. The finality of it hit me, and I could feel a weight lifting off my shoulders. He had taken a stand. He hadn't just passively accepted his mother's request. He had stood up for me and our daughter. He was done letting his family walk all over us. I slowly made my way to him, where Kyle was standing with his phone in hand. He looked at me, and in that moment I could see his determination to protect me and Lily in his eyes. We had been through so much, but this was different. This wasn't just about protecting our daughter. It was about protecting our marriage and our little family. Kyle, I began, but he pulled me into his arms before I could finish. The emotions flooded in, and for the first time that day, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. He wasn't just my husband, he was my ally. We were a team, and no one, not even his own mother, would break that. He pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes. He asked if I was okay, his voice softening as the tension in the room started to dissolve. I nodded, the anger and frustration I had been holding on to for hours starting to fade. I am now. Thank you. Kyle smiled at me, a genuine, warm smile. He kissed me on the forehead and promised that we would have our own holiday, just us and Lily. It didn't matter what anyone else thought. As long as we had each other, that's all that mattered. Update 2. The days following Kyle's stand were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt a sense of power, knowing that Kyle had stood up for me, for us. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the nagging thought that things between us and his family might never be the same. Karen's words still echoed in my head. How she had dismissed our importance for Jessica's sake. It stung, and I knew it would take a long time for that wound to heal. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Kyle's father, Dave, called me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk to him. He was a decent guy, but he often stayed silent when things went sideways in the family. So I braced myself for another awkward conversation, but when I answered, I was surprised by his tone. There was no defensiveness, no hesitation. He sounded genuinely concerned. He asked how I was doing and immediately apologized for Karen's behavior. He said he would handle it and made it clear that no one should ever treat me or our daughter the way Karen had. I listened, A little stunned that Dave wasn't brushing it off or trying to make excuses. I had always seen him as a bit of a passive figure in the family, someone who tended to let Karen run the show, but here he was, taking full responsibility for her actions. I explained what had happened, how Karen had tried to kick us out to give Jessica more space, and how she had been so dismissive of me and our baby. Dave was quiet as I spoke, and when I finished, he took a long breath. He apologized again, and this time more deeply. He said that Karen had no right to treat us that way and that he would address it. He assured me that this kind of behavior wasn't something he condoned and that it wouldn't happen again. His words were like a balm to a raw wound. It was comforting to hear that Kyle's father was willing to step in and address his wife's behavior, even if it was a bit late. But I wasn't foolish enough to expect everything to magically go back to normal. There were still deep-rooted issues within Kyle's family, and one conversation wasn't going to fix them overnight. I tried to keep things as calm as possible. Kyle and I went about our days, focusing on our daughter and our lives outside of the chaos of family drama. The holidays were still looming ahead, but we hadn't heard much from Karen or the rest of the family. I half expected them to reach out, maybe even apologize, but they remained silent. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from Kyle's dad again. This time, his tone was more serious. He didn't waste any time. He said, "I wanted to let you know that I've made a decision." There was no hesitation in his voice. "Karen has no idea yet, but I've cancelled the holiday plans. The whole thing's off." I was stunned. I asked if he was serious, and he confirmed that yes, he had called off the entire family holiday. It took me a moment to process what he was saying. I hadn't expected this. It wasn't that I was unhappy to hear it. I just hadn't thought that Dave would take such drastic action. He explained that he couldn't let what had happened continue and that he wasn't going to force me or Kyle to put up with Karen's behavior, especially not with our baby in the picture. I asked him again, uncertain if he was sure. I mean, it's the holidays. I didn't want to cause any more drama than what's already happened. But Dave was firm. He said, "It's not happening anymore. I couldn't in good conscience allow what Karen did to go unaddressed. You don't deserve to be treated that way, and especially not when you just gave birth. I'm putting a stop to it now." His words left me speechless. I had been expecting maybe a reconciliation attempt, some sort of olive branch extended by Karen or the family, but instead, Dave had taken charge, calling off the entire holiday. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but at that moment it felt huge. He continued that I didn't have to deal with this and that he was not going to let her keep doing this to me or to Kyle. "You're family and you deserve to be treated with respect." I could hear the sincerity in his voice, and for the first time, I believed that he was genuinely standing up for me. Dave had always been the quieter one in the family, often staying out of the drama, but now he was taking the lead, and it felt like a turning point. I thanked him, overwhelmed by his support. It wasn't what I had expected, but it was exactly what I needed. Dave reassured me that he would make sure Karen understood why the holiday plans were cancelled and that he wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation anymore. The conversation ended with Dave promising to keep me updated, and he said he would handle everything from here on out. I was left with a sense of cautious optimism. Maybe things would finally start to change in Kyle's family. Maybe with Dave stepping up, the toxic cycle would finally be broken. I told Kyle what Dave had said, and he was equally shocked, but pleased. He had never imagined his father would take such a strong stance. Kyle was grateful that his dad had finally stood up to Karen, and we both agreed that this was a step in the right direction. Over the next couple of days, there was a strange calm in the air. Karen hadn't reached out to us, which I thought was a good sign. Kyle and I focused on our daughter enjoying the peace and quiet without the looming anxiety of family gatherings. But there was still a part of me that couldn't completely relax. I knew that Karen's temper was unpredictable, and I didn't trust her to accept defeat so easily. Then, a couple of days later, we got word that the entire holiday had been cancelled officially. The extended family had been notified, and Dave had pulled the plug on the whole thing. Karen for sure knew now that the holiday was no longer happening. I wondered how she reacted when she found out. Did she accept Dave's decision, or did she lash out? At that moment, I didn't care. I was just grateful that for once someone had stood up for us. It wasn't about the holidays anymore. It was about setting a boundary and demanding respect. I felt like I had the upper hand. I wasn't going to be steamrolled by Karen, and neither was Kyle. We were a family and we had each other's backs. Update 3. The aftermath of Dave's decision to cancel the family holiday left everything in a tense, uncertain quiet for the rest of the family. Karen, who had been silent for the past few days, finally reached out. She couldn't keep her silence for long, could she? She sent me multiple messages, all laced with venom and blame, demanding that I make things right. Apparently the chaos of the holiday being cancelled had been too much for her to swallow, and she needed someone to pin it on. As usual, I was her scapegoat. Kyle had remained unfazed by her attempts to lash out. Jessica, too, had tried to reach him, sending him an enraged message, blaming him for everything. He didn't even dignify her with a response. He had finally reached a point where he realized that no matter what he said, they would never change. They had crossed a line, and he wasn't about to let them make us feel guilty for setting boundaries. Both of them could scream and shout all they wanted, but he had learned to ignore them, to keep his focus on what truly mattered, his family, not the toxic cycle they were trapped in. A few days passed without much action, but then came the bombshell. Jessica was no longer welcome at her parents' house. Her father had finally reached his breaking point. He had cut her off, fed up with her entitled behavior and constant demands. Her husband had filed for divorce, saying that Jessica's only interest had been in spending his money while doing nothing in return. He had tried to get through to her, to make her understand the value of hard work, but to no avail. Her constant disregard for their relationship and her refusal to change had driven him to the point of no return. He wasn't going to keep enabling her, and now she was left alone with no place to go except back to her parents, who had also had enough of her. At least that's what I heard from Kyle. I couldn't say I felt sorry for her. In fact, I was almost relieved. This was the same woman who had belittled me and dismissed my baby's existence in one of her messages to Kyle. Jessica had been a part of the toxic environment in Kyle's family, and now the consequences of her actions were catching up with her. She had nowhere left to run to. But Karen didn't seem to see the irony in all of this. She sent me another barrage of texts, the first one coming in the middle of the night. Since I hadn't been answering her calls, she figured texting was the only way to get through. She asked me, in the most passive-aggressive tone, to make things right again. Apparently, in Karen's world, everything was my fault. Me, who had stood up for her and who had refused to tolerate their treatment any longer. She had the audacity to blame me for cancellation of the holiday, claiming that I had ruined it all. She said that I was being unreasonable and blamed the baby for all the chaos. She said that Lily was just a crying infant and that I had no right to bring her into a situation where people were trying to rest. I could barely contain my fury. It was as if she had no concept of how wrong she was. She made it seem as though my daughter's mere existence was an inconvenience to her. What type of grandmother was she? She went on to say that she had only asked us to leave early so that there could be peace in the house. She said that nobody could rest with a crying baby around. The message was so filled with venom that I almost felt sick reading it. I had tolerated enough of her manipulation, and this was the last straw. I couldn't hold back anymore. With my hands shaking in anger, I typed my response and I told her she would never see Lily again. I told her that I had no intention of ever allowing someone like her, who treated my baby as an inconvenience, to have any part in our lives. Lily didn't need a grandmother like her who was so disgustingly entitled and controlling. I told Karen exactly what I thought. I didn't care if it was harsh. I didn't care if it meant she'd never speak to me again. The truth needed to be said. I told her that it wasn't my fault the holiday had been cancelled. It was her own actions that had led to this. She had been the one to make it clear that our family wasn't welcome as long as it didn't fit her image of the perfect family holiday. I sent the message and sat back, my heart pounding. It felt liberating in a way to finally stand up for myself so firmly. I braced myself for the backlash. But what was I supposed to do? Keep tolerating their treatment? Let my daughter grow up knowing that her grandmother didn't want her around because she was just a crying baby? Kyle had seen the message before I sent it, and he was right there beside me when I hit send. He looked at me, his expression full of support. He hadn't wanted to be the one to sever ties, but he agreed with everything I'd said. He had no intention of ever allowing his family to continue treating us that way. Minutes after I sent the message, my phone buzzed with a reply from Karen. I almost didn't want to read it, but I knew I had to. She had tried to justify herself, claiming she only wanted what was best for everyone, and that it wasn't personal. She said I was overreacting and that she was just trying to help Jessica through a tough time, and that Lily's presence would have been the one thing preventing peace. I didn't bother responding. I didn't need to. The conversation was over. Kyle's reaction had been everything I needed. His support, his willingness to back me up, had made all the difference. He stood by me, no questions asked, and we both knew we had made the right decision. The next morning, I got a text from Jessica. It was a long, rambling message filled with venom and accusations. She told me that I was ruining the family, that I had ruined the holidays, and that I would regret this. She accused me of keeping Kyle from his family, of making him choose between them and me. It was the same old game. She wanted to play the victim, and I wasn't interested anymore. I didn't respond. I knew I didn't need to explain myself to her. Update 4. Despite everything that had happened, Kyle was determined to salvage something positive from this chaotic holiday season. He knew we needed to reclaim our peace, and the only way to do that was by surrounding ourselves with the right people. He reached out to Jessica's ex-husband, Mark, who had always been a good friend to Kyle. They had known each other for years. Kyle had invited Mark over for the holiday, knowing it would give him a much-needed opportunity to spend time with someone who he liked, while also shoving it in his mother's and Jessica's faces. I had met Mark on a few occasions, and though things hadn't ended well with Jessica, I could tell he was a stand-up guy. I appreciated that he wasn't the kind of person to play the blame game, especially with everything that had gone down with Jessica. He had no issue putting his foot down and doing what was best for himself. Kyle's cousin, Rachel, also offered to come and help with cooking. She had always been more laid back than the rest of the family, and I had always gotten along well with her on the few times she showed up. It was refreshing to know that she was eager to contribute to the meal and bring some positive energy to our home. She wasn't the type to try and fix things or get involved in family squabbles. She simply wanted to enjoy the holidays with us and make sure we had a good time. She didn't care about Karen and her rules, and everybody knew that. It was hilarious how indifferent she was. Kyle's father, Dave, was another key figure in this plan. After everything had settled and he'd had time to reflect on his wife's behavior, he felt it was important to show his support. Despite the tension between him and Karen, he had no problem attending our gathering. Kyle had made it clear that his father was welcome, and Dave was more than willing to put aside any lingering resentment to be with us. A few cousins of Kyle's, who we hadn't seen in a while, also accepted the invitation to join us. It was the perfect mix of people. People who weren't caught up in the drama, who genuinely wanted to make the most of the holiday. The atmosphere was completely different from what we'd expected just a week before. There was no stress, no passive-aggressive comments, and most importantly, no toxic energy. As the day unfolded, I realized how right Kyle had been to make these changes. The house was filled with laughter and conversation, a stark contrast to the tension and hurt that had hung over us for days. Mark and Kyle's cousin were getting along well, swapping funny stories and cracking jokes while preparing the meal together. Rachel had insisted on making her famous stuffing, while Mark had brought his famous mashed potatoes. When Dave arrived, he immediately expressed his gratitude for the invitation. He was polite and even a little apologetic, but it was clear that he wasn't interested in revisiting the family drama. The focus was on the people who mattered, the ones who were truly present and supportive.